Story 1. A weekend in the woods was supposed to be a peaceful escape for Sarah and her friends, but they would soon wish they had never set foot in that forest. Sarah and her friends arrived at the campsite as the sun was setting, casting eerie shadows through the dense trees. They gathered around a roaring campfire, telling ghost stories and laughing, until they heard a whisper, just faint enough to seem like the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, a soft, guttural sound whispering from the darkness just beyond the fire's glow. One of them, Tom, laughed nervously, saying it must be an echo or an animal. But as the night deepened, the voice grew louder, shifting from whispers to a low, unsteady growl. And now it was saying something. The words were garbled, but occasionally they'd catch their names mixed in with unsettling sounds. Every time they got up to investigate, the whisper would stop, only to resume once they were back at the fire. Each friend sat silent, gripped by a cold fear that settled deep in their bones. Then, just before dawn, the whisper took on an almost pleading tone, as if it were begging them to come closer. Sarah swore she saw a pair of eyes glinting in the darkness, watching her. When morning finally came, they packed up without saying a word, haunted by the voice that had stalked them through the night. To this day, Sarah claims she can hear it sometimes, even when she's far from any woods. Story 2. We all see strange shadows in the dark sometimes, but what if that shadow was watching you and moving closer every night? For Liam, waking up at 3:15 a.m. became a nightly occurrence. At first, he thought he was just waking up out of habit, but soon he realized there was something else, something standing in the corner of his room. It was a shadow, tall and dark, and though it didn't move, he felt its eyes on him, watching. Liam convinced himself it was just a trick of the light, maybe cast by a chair or a coat, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every night, he would wake up at exactly 3:15, and every night, the shadow seemed a little closer, as if it were stepping toward him inch by inch. One night, he worked up the courage to sit up and face it, only to see it shift, leaning toward him with an impossible slowness. The next night, it was by his bed. He could make out its features, a blank face, darkened by shadows, and eyes that seemed hollow and endless. He felt its cold presence as it reached out, brushing his face with an icy touch that left his skin tingling. He jumped out of bed, flicking on the lights, but the shadow was gone. Liam moved out shortly after, but he's never been able to shake the feeling of eyes watching him at night. He wonders if he truly left that shadow behind, or if it's still following him, waiting for him to fall asleep. Story 3. Mirrors are said to be portals, reflecting not just our world, but sometimes something beyond. And Emma's mirror seemed to be holding a presence of its own. Emma was a collector, a lover of all things old and beautiful. When she found an ornate mirror at an antique shop, it seemed like the perfect addition to her collection. The seller warned her that the mirror had a dark history, but Emma brushed it off, finding the story charming rather than chilling. That night, as she hung it on her bedroom wall, she thought she saw a faint figure in the glass, just behind her reflection. She looked again, but nothing was there. Thinking it was her imagination, she went to bed. But each night, she would catch glimpses, a shadowy face, hovering just behind her. Then, one night, the face became clearer, its eyes dark and empty, with a mouth that stretched into a sinister smile. She could almost hear a voice, whispering, "Let me out." Frozen in fear, she backed away, but her reflection didn't move. The figure, still smiling, reached out as if it could step right through the glass. Emma tried to sell the mirror, but every buyer backed out, saying they felt something unsettling when they looked into it. She locked it in her basement, but the whispering never stopped. Every now and then, she hears faint laughter from the basement, like the mirror is calling her back. Story 4. Imagine you're alone in your house. It's midnight, and everything is quiet. Then there's a knock at the door, soft at first, but then it doesn't stop. Jason had always lived alone, so when he heard a knock on his door one night at exactly 12:03 a.m., he was a little startled. But when he opened it, no one was there. The next night, the knock came again. Same time, same door, and again, no one outside. By the 5th night, the knock was louder, more insistent, like someone was pounding with both fists. Jason's hands shook as he opened the door, expecting to find someone. But he was met only by the empty street. He decided to ignore it, convinced it was some prank or his imagination. But then he heard it again, louder, as if it were right inside his room. When he turned, he saw someone, a shadowy figure, pale and hollow-eyed, standing in his bedroom doorway. Its face was twisted into a grin as it pointed down the hallway, beckoning him forward. When he finally looked down the hall, he saw himself standing there, in his bed, staring back. Jason slammed the door shut, but the knocking has never stopped. To this day, he hears it every night at 12:03, the relentless reminder of that chilling encounter. Story 5. There's something disturbing about an empty mall. And when Ella got separated from her friends one night, she found herself in a terrifying situation she couldn't escape. Ella and her friends had been wandering the mall just before it closed, laughing and taking photos. But somehow, she got separated, lost in the twisting hallways of the lower levels. As she searched for her friends, she heard it, a child's faint, distant cry. She followed the sound, her steps echoing in the empty mall. The cries grew louder, leading her to an old, abandoned wing of the building. There in the darkness, she saw a small boy, his clothes tattered and his face smeared with dirt. She crouched down, asking him if he was lost. But he didn't answer. He just looked up at her, his eyes empty and dark. Then he whispered, "Come play with us." Ella turned and saw other children, all with the same empty eyes, peering at her from the shadows. She backed away, but they reached out, cold fingers grasping at her hands and pulling her deeper into the darkness. She finally broke free and ran, and when she looked back, they were gone. But ever since that night, Ella has dreams of that boy, and she wakes up to the sound of children laughing, as if they're waiting for her to come back.